How you going? It's Stephen here. So, you want to be a landlord and avoid some costly mistakes before you start your journey. So today I'm going to share with you 5 things that I wish that I'd known before I became a landlord at the age of 23. This is the type of information I'm going to be sharing with my daughter when she starts her investing journey. She's only 2 at the moment, but hey, you're never too young to start to think about how to invest your money. Each of the lessons I'm going to share with you today will either save you money, time, or aggravation. I'm going to share with you real life examples of what actually happened to me, how I overcame them to learn that lesson, and how you can do the same. Being a landlord has been one of the best things I've done, and I'm sure it'll be one of the best things that you can do too, armed with the right information up front. So let's get into it. So one of the most important things that I've learned from being an investor is that you need to actually start with an end in mind. And what I mean by that is you need to create a deal profile of what you're actually looking to go and get. You want to be thinking about the area that property is located in. You've also got to be thinking about how much money you have available from your own cash reserve to buy that property. You also want to be thinking about what is your strategy for that property. Are you looking to just buy a property and rent it out, or do you want to do something a bit more advanced where you want to renovate that property or develop part of that property? You need to be thinking about, can you qualify for a mortgage? Understand what that criteria is to obtain a mortgage. Can you afford a mortgage? With property, you'll be getting a buy-to-let mortgage specifically, not a normal home ownership mortgage. You'll also need to be thinking about the time frame that you want to be achieving this result in, and the type of tenant that you're looking to get into that property. Getting the right tenant is going to save you a lot of hassle and a lot of aggravation down the track. Bad tenants can cause you lots of problems and cost you lots of money in the long run. This way, by creating this deal profile, you're going to be less emotionally attached to a property when you're looking for one, and you're just going to be looking at facts and figures to determine what type of property you're looking for in which area, and you're not going to be wasting your time on Rightmove just looking for every area up and down the country, which is going to be totally overwhelming and probably demotivation after a couple of weeks. One of the other things to do with your deal profile when you're working that out is to look at yourself and think, what type of investor are you? So there's 2 types of investors. There's a passive investor and an active investor. And the passive investor is just someone that wants to collect the money at the end of the month and not really get involved with the property too much at all. Whereas an active investor is someone that wants to go out there, spend a lot of time on the property, dealing with tenants, maybe doing renovations or managing the contractors to do the renovations, a lot more hands-on. You're going to be getting a lot more aggravation. The upside is that you're going to be keeping your costs maybe a bit down. A passive investor is someone that's just going to be looking for yield and for capital appreciation over time. There's nothing that they do. They're kind of buy and hold investors, whereas an active investor is trying to manufacture the profit they're trying to achieve, and that's normally in something like a 3 to 6 month time frame. When you're thinking about your deal profile, you might also want to be thinking about what type of property you want to be buying. So by type, I mean residential or commercial. Also, qualifying for a mortgage has an impact on which one of those 2 you go for, but that's something I'll probably discuss in another video, not on today's. So one of the things that I did when I was starting on my investment journey was I actually implemented the strategy of buying, refurbishing, rent, and refinancing. Now, what I did to achieve this was I had a property in London. It was in Zone 2 in a nice part of London. It was in a big block. Now, there's properties that were being sold already refurbished in this block. I went specifically for one that was unrefurbished. This way I got a better price for it. I got quite a big saving off of it, and I thought I'll just do it myself and hire and work with trades to be able to do the work that was needed and do it to the level that I wanted it to be done. I bought the property, got a great price, got it slightly below asking price as well, about £7,000 off of the asking price, and I got in some trades to give me some quotes to refurbish the unit. I refurbished it, and this was totally getting all of the new floors down, put in a new kitchen, new downlights, repainted everything. It was something that I then was able to get a higher rent for because it was recently done up and it was done to a good standard. So I was able then to rent that out for a good amount of money. I then got the property refinanced by getting the lender to come in and revalue the property. So they revalued it at about nearly £100,000 more than what I paid for it after about 9 months of having that property. So that meant by doing that refinance, I was able to get a substantial amount of cash back out of that property, which then went for my deposit to the next property. And I was then able to buy the next property without any of my own money, and therefore I was no money out of pocket to be able to buy that second home. By this stage, I'd worked out that I needed to create a deal profile, what I wanted to do, and leveraging the buy, refurbish, rent, refinance strategy enabled me to get that second property. So the second lesson is use a property manager. Now this is a lesson that I've learned the hard way, and you really want to be using a property manager because you just don't want that aggravation. You don't want the calls, you don't want the emails, you don't want to have to be coordinating all of the things that could potentially go wrong with your property. Outsource that to really a property manager. Let them deal with all the calls, all the hassles, organising trades, collecting the rent, and then just paying you whatever's left of the rent after they've paid the bills for that month. So as a passive investor, this is something that you definitely want to be doing. You want to be getting a property manager. If you're an active investor, maybe you think you can manage the property on your own, but based on my experience, I don't recommend you do that. I recommend that you pay the extra money and have less aggravation in your life. It probably depends how old you are. I was young and did the same thing when I was a lot younger, in my early 20s. I thought I knew enough that I would just go and manage my own properties. So I had a couple of properties. They were both in London at the time. I was living in London, and I thought I could easily manage these properties and save that 15% that I was paying for this company to fully manage them. And I had one particular problem where I thought I knew what I was doing, and I had this tenant and wanted to exit that property, but he couldn't do that until he found another tenant to replace him on kind of his lease. I wasn't going to let him out of the lease. He found a tenant for me, and I checked him out. He came, met him at the property. It's all suited and booted, looked great, looked like a very respectable person, said he had his own business. I checked on his business. He showed me letter-headed paper, and he spoke quite well about everything. I did a quick search on his business, company's house, it was still active and all the things like that. But he wanted to give me a cheque. Now, normally I never accept cheques because all sorts can happen with a cheque. This is going back quite a few years. So he gave me a cheque. It was a business cheque, so that was one of the reasons why I accepted it. His business existed, and I thought, okay, I'll take a business cheque because normally they'll go through fine. And I let him in there and then gave him the keys. What I then found out was that cheque went through, went into my account, but then somehow the money was in there, but then it got taken out after a day or two. And I was like, what is this? I've never known that to happen before. And then I was calling him, and then he was giving me all these different, like the typical examples about what might have happened. He'd look into it, just delay. I didn't do the right due diligence on that person correctly. I think with a property manager in place, they would have done better due diligence than I had at that time. I was only about 25, I think, when I did that. You got all that kind of hassle with turnover of tenants, problems, fixing stuff, especially if you're not local. You know, you've got to drive half an hour, you've got to drive an hour to that property. Honestly, I'd just get a property manager to look after stuff. And that's the lesson that we've learned going forward, is that, you know, we've got multiple properties overseas where now we have a property manager just looking after them, paying the bills, organising trades, and they just pay us the money at the end of the month and just generate us a nice return on our investment for those particular properties with no hassle, no aggravation at all. So lesson number 3 then is to do with maintenance and repairs and your vacancy rates. When you're working out how much you should be buying a property for and how much return it's going to get you, you want to be looking at what's the likely maintenance required on that property. After you've inspected it, what actual repairs are going to be needed to be done. Also, when you go and inspect the property, you want to be looking for deferred maintenance on that property. Now, this could be something to do with air conditioning or the boiler, big items like that, the roof or downpipes, guttering, any rising damp, things that if left and neglected are going to cost you more money, and you need to get them done up front really before you move a tenant in, and that's what we call deferred maintenance. And you want to be getting those things identified and putting a cost around it so you can determine how much your offer should be, and you can justify it by saying, well, these things haven't been done on your property. Either you get them done now before settlement, or I'll do them and I want this amount off to justify why I'm giving you this asking price. And a critical piece here is you need to be thinking about the vacancy rates, because when your property is vacant, you need to make sure that you've got cash reserves that can hold you over for that period, because you've still got to be making mortgage payments. If it's only a month, in reality, you're going to be quite okay. But when you're investing in property, always give yourself a bit of a buffer. Don't go and spend all of the money you're making. Ideally, you want to be saving all of that money, using all of it to go and invest again and buy a next property. You need to factor in a vacancy period whenever you're doing your return on investment. And I like to just use 1 month vacancy for that property so that we factor in that amount in our calculations. So we've got properties that we own that are in the US, and some of those properties are rented to Section 8 tenants, which are government-backed tenants. Now, what we found with some of those tenants is that when it comes to the end of their tenancy, we go into the property and the property's not in a great state. The walls, doors, cupboards and things like that, blinds have been damaged, the carpets normally are damaged. So what we found is that when these tenants leave, we've got all these types of problems there. It costs us quite a bit of money to fix this type of stuff up. The great thing about our property management company is we get tenants within like a week, because it takes a week maybe to get it rent ready. The great thing about Section 8 tenants is that it's backed by government, so therefore you get guaranteed payment. The government are paying their rent for you, or a portion of the rent, like 90%, 80% of the rent. The tenant just has to pay the little top-up amount. And this way, doesn't matter if things like COVID are around, we're still getting our rent payments all the time. But now what we've learned from that is we need to factor in these amounts of maintenance and repair costs that we are always going to get on these properties. And we're now deciding to move from residential into more commercial properties, where we compare what aggravation we get from the commercial tenants, because they're on full repairing and insuring leases, compared to residential tenants when we've got to fix everything that breaks all the time. Lesson number 4 then is service charges and sinking funds. You need to work out what they're going to be. So this is more if you're going to be buying leasehold properties, you're going to get service charges and sinking funds. If you're buying freehold, you don't have to worry about service charges, sinking funds. In the US, they're called HOA fees, housing of association fees, that you have to pay as part of the servicing and maintenance of a bigger building when it's split up into apartments and flats. One of the big things that's hitting the news at the moment here in the UK is that we've got the issues with the cladding that can catch fire, and all the flats, apartments, the high-rise buildings that have this particular issue are now having their service charges racked up to like 15,000 a month. So it's just gone through the roof that people no longer can pay that type of bill, and there's not much that they can do about it, because as the leaseholder you have to pay the service charge, and the service charges are based on what the costs are to do with running that building. Now the sinking fund is there to enable you to pay for bigger items that the managing agents will collect for you. Now they could be things like the roof or the lifts. When you're buying leasehold property, you really need to find out who the managing agents are, what's the service charge, what's the sinking fund's costs, and look at it over a number of years and see if they're planning for these types of maintenance that's going to be required as part of the sinking fund. Have they kind of been consistent, so the service charge is the same amount every year, the sinking fund's the same, or has it been slowly going up and up and up? So with us, we had a property that was in a big block, it was on the top floor. There was a management company that was in charge running that for the leaseholders in that property. They weren't doing a very good job. Nothing was kind of being repaired, nothing was being looked after, lifts were failing, paint was flaking off walls in different parts of the building. And so the leaseholders got together, and one particular leaseholder decided to set up their own management company and was more vested in the interest of the building because they actually lived there and wanted to do the right things and keep the costs to a minimum. Because then we saw things were actually getting done. The service charges were kind of flattening out. It was kind of consistent, but then we had to pay a lot more for sinking fund and things like that because the lifts needed doing. Then we had to paint the building every 5 years as well. So the benefit was the building was getting looked after properly, which in the end adds more value to your property. But definitely keep a mind out for service charges and sinking funds when you're buying a leasehold property. Now lesson number 5 then is to buy a property in a limited company. Now this is something that's been big news over in the UK more recently. When I first started out, I always just bought stuff in my own name. There was no impact tax-wise or anything like that by doing so. You could claim the same amounts that you could do if you were in a company. So the reason why I would recommend that you buy stuff in a company name now is that if you hold things in your own personal name, you can no longer claim any finance costs or interest costs to do with that property. Whereas if you own it in a company name, you can still claim those costs and deduct finance costs like fees and arrangement fees and things like that that you'd have to pay. Also, your mortgage interests on that property if it's owned in a limited company. Also, if you own property in your own name and you're generating another income, it could then move you into a higher tax bracket. So that's another consideration to think about. If you want to hold stuff in your own name, what's the impact of generating another income from this property, another income from this property? Is it going to eventually bump you up into the next tax bracket and therefore eroding the amount of money that you're going to be making? Now, I'm not an accountant or anything like that. I'm just giving you information based on what we do. You need to go and speak to an accountant for your own advice to determine what's right for you in your own situation. So one of the things that we're definitely going to be doing going forward is any property that we buy in the UK, we're going to be buying that in a limited company so we can make sure that we're going to be tax efficient so that we can claim these finance costs and the mortgage interest going forward, because that's the most tax efficient process for us to do. We're also finding in the UK now that there's more mortgage providers that are providing buy-to-let mortgages for limited companies. So you're not as restricted as you were, say, a few years ago, because everyone's understanding that a lot more people are buying property in limited companies. So this isn't going to adversely affect you going forward. So I hope these lessons have given you insight into what it would be like if you want to become a landlord and some of the things you need to look out for before you start your journey. Give us a like if you felt you've learned something from these lessons, and comment below if you've got any questions. I'll do my best to answer all of the questions that I get. Investing in property is one of the best things that we've been able to do, and I'm sure it'll be one of the best things you can do for your investments going forward. So if you want to keep the conversation going, please join our private Facebook group with everything to do with property, and I'll put the link in the description below. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and please subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be posting lots more videos like this one going forward. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and see what I'm up to over there, and I'll see you next time.